How's that? I haven't started yet. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, it's very good to see so many people infesting the campus of UCLA for such a wonderful fair as has been brought us by Steve Wasserman, my old friend, and the LA Times Book Review and his collaborators. But I must say it's very depressing to see this number of people coming to a discussion on the nation's capital. I always hope for ill-attended meetings on this subject myself. Whenever I read people saying that public cynicism is so great that we may be in real trouble, nobody likes the system, nobody trusts the politicians, nobody votes, I think we would really only be in trouble if that was not so. So signs of enthusiasm are very much deplored. I think I speak for us all here. And well, it's our job to dispel any illusions you may have brought along with you. There are only a very few. I've been in Washington now 16 years. I've picked up only a very few basic maxims. My name is Christopher Hitchens. I'll be your moderator today. I've never been a moderator before. I suppose that may be why I was asked to be a moderator this time. I will moderate this event, which I've garnered in that period and would share with you, like to share with you. Some of them are from I.F. Stone. Some of them are from Mike Kinsley, some of them are from Anonymous. They are, the scandal in Washington is never what is illegal. The scandal is always what's legal already. Don't believe anything until it's been officially denied at least 3 times. That one is, that one was Izzy Stone. I keep that one above my typewriter, pinned up. You never know on what page of the Washington Post, our great hometown newspaper, you never know on what page you will find the page 1 story. And if you want a friend within the Beltway, get a dog. We have a canine expert, in fact, here today, partly for this reason. I think you're very well served, if I may say so, by your panelists. Reading from the end towards me, Arianna Huffington, who I've known as Arianna Stassinopoulos. Arianna Stassinopoulos Huffington, Arianna Huffington. F. Scott Fitzgerald was never more wrong, I've sometimes thought, than when he said there are no second acts in American lives. Arianna is here, I think we might say, to dispute that proposition. In the middle we have Larry Beinart, whose book, American Hero, I'm sure a lot of you have read, and whose movie I was very lucky to see. One of the very few good things that's come to me from living in Washington in the recent past was the good fortune to go to the premiere of Wag the Dog and to get an advance jump. A canine jump, if you will, on what was to come. And then right next to me, which puts me in I think this is not invidious to say, in the Place d'Honneur, in the place of honor, Paul Krasner. I can't tell you what he's meant to me. When we spoke the last time we met, which was at the Abby Hoffman Memorial Meeting in New York, I wasn't able to tell him. I was too tongue-tied, but for those of us who remember back to that crucial year, 1964, and reading The Realist and reading the unpublished chapter from the William Manchester book on the Kennedy assassination, and finding out that it was all true about Lyndon Johnson and the special cranial surgery and the new passages for penetration. Well, I can only say I'm lost still when I think back on it. I've heard people say that they think it's not true, some kind of a put-on. The word Terry Sullivan was once mentioned. I think certain things are just morally true, okay? Speaking of new avenues of penetration and so forth, I suppose if you want a conception of the surreal in Washington, the most recent one I'd be able to offer you would be, just remember, because memory is short, remember the time that this president fired his own personally chosen female Surgeon General, Joycelyn Elders. Do you remember why he fired her? You do. So I don't have to embarrass the C-SPAN audience by saying that it was for talking about hand jobs in public. You're on TV, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Now, from not being able to mention as Surgeon General the humble, unassuming hand job, the same president forcing the entire country to say blowjob in front of their families within months later. seems to me to be, and here I want to make a strictly bipartisan point, progress of a kind. Very well then. We have a fantastic mixture of age, experience, and brains and beauty to go on. And for that reason, I think I'll ask Paul to start. I'm going to ask them all to be pungent and brisk, because I know you will have questions. And here we go.
I've never been referred to as a brazen beauty before. Thank you very much. I think that Steve Allen once said that satire is tragedy plus time. But what's happened is that the rate of irreverence has been accelerating along with everything else. And that's particularly been enhanced by the World Wide Web. So that now not only has reality been nipping at the heels of satire, but it occasionally overtakes it. It overtook it yesterday, I remember, when I was watching C-SPAN and I saw Brian Lamb discussing the semantics of scumbag. My left and right lobes of my brain fused at that moment. But what's been happening is that all of this scandal has served as America's glasnost, which is Russian for truth. And I just want to quote one little thing from a book called The Congress of Clowns and Other Russian Circus Acts by Joel Schechter, in which he writes, this was at the time of glasnost, and it's what's happening in America today. In Leningrad, the highly regarded humorist Semyon Altov said that he has moved from satire to non-topical, more universal fiction in his recent writing, because newspaper reporters are now providing the public with the news of dissent that only satire could convey previously. And it's true. I saw on ABC News, in the evening news, there was the anchor, Peter Jennings, and Cokie Roberts was in Washington in the field, and Jennings said to her, "Cokie, what do you think the spin will be tomorrow?" Now, I don't want to seem old-fashioned, but I remember a time when the news was reporting what had happened, rather than asking journalists to predict what the propaganda would be the next day. But it's not just the news people that do that. It's also the people in the news, mostly inadvertently. Let me read this to you because I want to get the exact quote. Because this was not a line from Jay Leno or David Letterman or Conan O'Brien, but this was from Bernard Lewinsky, Monica Lewinsky's father, who had this to say in defense of his daughter. Quote, "She's a very smart, intelligent, beautiful girl who's going to go places, and unfortunately, she's taking her licks." Now, but you know, he's an oncologist. People specialize. So one other little sentence I want to read here, because it makes the point how satire and reality, the line between them is getting so blurred that even I, as an editor of a publication which never labels something as satire or reality, because I don't want to deprive readers the pleasure of discerning for themselves whether something is true or a satirical extension of the truth. So a fella in Portland, Oregon, who's really the revolutionary voice, they have a publication called Weapon, and it's posted on 500 telephone poles throughout the city, and but it's very radical. And he wrote a piece for me on the private prison system, and it was a very satirical piece, but mixed with truth. And there was one thing where he refers to here. He says, in fact, slavery, because there is a form of slavery in the prison now with prison labor. You know, those telecommuter calls we get, as from some murderer in a cell on his cell phone. So he writes here, these lower production costs trickle down to the consumer. Cheaper labor means lower prices at the supermarket and more affordable cars. Given the reliable increase in the crime rate, we could staff more and more industry with cost-effective prison labor. America could return to a slave economy in which criminals are bought and sold, providing a life of luxury and idle pleasure for the victims and the obedient, law-abiding people. In fact, slavery was never outlawed in the United States. The 13th article of the Constitution states, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, shall exist within the United States. I thought, what a brilliant piece of satire, and then I checked, and that is the 13th article. There are copies of this issue of The Realist. Help yourself. They'll be at both ends as you leave. Just one more final point, which is that what passes for political satire today is really name-calling and easy references, easy reference humor. So even during the last campaign, you know, always there were sex and diet jokes about Bill Clinton, and there were ageist and temper jokes about Bob Dole. But it never got to the issues. And it applies, it's not just Washington. Political satire applies to the laws that are passed in order for people to maintain power and popularity. And so, you know, so therefore Bill Clinton, who is so charming, you forget that underneath the charm is this guy who went to the execution of a mentally retarded prisoner on his way to becoming president, and who now, Mr. Compassion, is against medical marijuana. You know, it's sort of, I feel your pain, I just don't want to help relieve it. And so whenever you see on the late night talk shows and there's somebody doing a joke about Robert Downey, what they're doing is they're making the victim the target of the satire. And instead of doing an easy reference joke about Robert Downey, they could attack the laws that make an addiction a crime. And that's the sad part of it. Thanks.
Very good. Ariana, we're in your hands.
Well, I bring you news from last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington about just how dead political satire is. After all, this is the one occasion every year when official Washington comes together to skewer each other. The president is supposed to skewer the fourth estate to skewer the president. Well, last night, the president did his job pretty well, as he always does on those occasions, deflecting criticism from himself through humor. The fourth estate was so tame, so contemptible, that I actually hired a comedian who said to them, apparently, when he was hired, that he knows nothing about politics, he does not follow politics, at which point they offered to double his fee. And he proceeded to give us basically a Las Vegas stand-up act about his twins and his life and the fact that once you have twins, you only have sex every 3 months. And that kind of stuff that would have been fine, you know, in a Las Vegas show, but not on the one occasion, once a year, when you're supposed to say something satirical about the president. The Washington establishment is terrified. At the parties afterwards, everybody was saying how relieved they were that nobody said anything to embarrass the president. I mean, that's what this occasion has been about for years. And basically the bottom line is that the state of ridicule, the state of late-night Monica jokes on Len or Letterman is very healthy. I would say it's about as healthy as the president's blood flow. On the other hand, the state of satire is about as healthy as the blood flow of, let's say, Warren Christopher. So what do? Basically, we're living in an entirely surrealistic American politics. I just discovered yesterday that the Library of Congress has classified my book, Greetings from the Lincoln Bedroom, as current American history. Which, when you consider that it takes place over a fantasy weekend in the White House, with Socks the cat being my guide and my deep throat, the vice president being a talking statue, and the president and the speaker reaching a historic bipartisan agreement in the hot tub that oral sex is not adultery, you wonder if this is current American history. What is satire? And the reason why I say that satire is absolutely dead is that satire traditionally has been fueled by passionate belief, by the desire to change the world. And there is a quote actually from Paul Krasner that I use a lot, so I'm going to quote it in his presence, when he said that sometimes humor is just a way of calling attention to the contradictions or the hypocrisy that's going on officially. That's the function of humor. It can alter your reality. And that's what we don't have of. enough of. We basically have a reality that is completely stagnant politically. We have two political parties, but one political class, which is why increasingly you have people of the left and right coming together looking for new alliances. And which is why in this, my 7th book, I turn to satire, because really there's no other way for me to approach American politics. Polling and pollsters have basically ruined politics, and one of the things that we can actually do, one of the small acts of civil disobedience, is for all of you here to hang up on pollsters next time they call you. And if you don't have the courage to do that, just hang up on them and then lie to them if you don't have the courage to hang up on them. Anything to contaminate the sample.
Bravo.
So basically, through satire as a form of dissent is what interests me. And the more we practice it, the more likely we are to challenge the Washington establishment and to produce some fundamental change that is needed. Because as Abraham Lincoln tells me when he comes to visit me in the Lincoln bedroom, very well preserved, if I may say so, he tells me that leadership has always been a risky business. And leadership has always been about moving a nation from where it is to where it needs to be. Well, there's nobody who can fit that description today, because leadership at the moment has become simply an exercise of commissioning a poll, receiving those shallow results, and then feeding them back to the American public in this most toxic recycling. And that's leadership. No wonder over 50% of the American people have tuned out and don't even bother to vote. And what is remarkable is that when you remember the Columbus, Ohio town hall meeting, it just took a few hecklers to change American foreign policy, which shows how relatively easy it is once we stop actually simply accepting the pablum we're being fed to create a critical mass of citizens that change things. And the final point I want to make is that I have a sort of all-consuming desire to lower our guffaw threshold. What I mean by that is, do you remember the good old days when we used to laugh at Dan Quayle? Well, misspelling... We still do, but you know what? Misspelling potato is a trivial crime compared to what's going on right now, and yet nobody's laughing. At least not enough of us are laughing to create a major, loud belly laugh. For example, when in Africa the president was asked why he invoked executive privilege, and he replied that he didn't know anything about it, he just read about it in the morning papers. Why didn't the press call guffaw? Why didn't they laugh so hard that they had tears in their eyes that they couldn't even write the statement down? Instead, like the sheep that the American media have become, they wrote it down and moved on. Or when Newt Gingrich, because I'm an equal opportunity offender, when Newt Gingrich was talking to Brian Lamb and told him in book notes that he's really given up largely the Sunday shows because they're full of self-important people. I mean... Self-importance is the man's distinguishing characteristic. After all, he was the one who said, I have an overweening ambition, I want to shift the planet, and I'm doing it. And yet, nobody laughed. So, please, as the beginning to sort of resurrecting political satire, lower your guffaw threshold, laugh at the expense of our political leaders of both parties, hang up on pollsters, and begin to demand more political satire based on passionate conviction instead of just late-night, easy Monica jokes. And I'd just like to end with a late-night, easy Monica joke, which is that when I arrived at the White House, which is very much like Disneyland, outside the Lincoln bedroom, I saw a sign that said, you have to be this high to ride the president.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Thank you, Ariana. They say if you live...
That was Greek. And in case you are wondering, I'm wearing the cover of my book.
Which Abby Hoffman fought for you to have the right to do.
That's true. And they say if you live long enough, everything will in the end happen to you. Now, Ariana and I can link arms with the absent Mario Savio and say, put your bodies on the gears, throw them on the levers, try and stop the machine, try and gum up the machine. Otherwise, what you'll get is another person who was a great hero of my youth, Tom Lehrer, whose songs I was listening to at the same time I was learning to read The Realist. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom Lehrer, who I'm sure many of you remember as a songsmith, who I was... That's why no one clapped, because they couldn't hear me. Whose songs I was learning to appreciate around the same time I was learning to read The Realist, hung up his gloves. You remember why he stopped writing songs? There's always someone in the audience, isn't there? Some troublemaker. No, actually, he hung up his gloves when Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Prize for Peace. He said, I can't do anything with this. And nothing, nothing occurs to me. The words won't come. It was a bad day. Larry.
Wow. Next time, remind me to go first, not third. Play top this. The press doesn't laugh. It's not what they do. I had my 5 minutes of, or 2 minutes or 35 seconds of fame during the Monica Lewinsky feeding frenzy. And so I got to do a bunch of interviews. And I normally try to be funny. I don't know if I'm going to do that tonight. Because
We'll be the judge of that.
but anyway, and when I was talking to press people, I just couldn't make them smile. They would just... like, this must be serious. You're talking. This must be serious. I mean, these are the people who during the great Monica Lewinsky opening act would stand out there in front of the White House for hours, and we'd switch to them on camera, and you'd get, Jane, I'm standing out here in front of the White House, and as you can see, there's nothing actually happening here, but I am standing here, and I will continue to stand here, and if anybody goes in or out, I will tell you about it. I will be the first one to tell you about it. And I will continue to stand here because the White House is behind me, and this is the White House in crisis. You know, I mean, and that's what they do. And it really doesn't matter what the subject is. You know, they do it with the weather, too. We are on a hurricane watch. And we in the press love hurricane watches because we know that the event will happen, and we can place our camera in position so that we can see it happen, and you are watching it now. But anyway, that's what the press does. Now, what satirist does, or what I learned from Paul Krasner, was you take the same stuff and you put a new label on it. My favorite realist shtick was something called Softcore Pornography of the Month Award, in which Paul would take photographs of things that had previously appeared to be completely innocuous, and by so labeling them, transform them. Three that come to mind. One was a picture of a gear shift in a Volkswagen, and it was a Volkswagen ad, and the Volkswagen ad said, "Is your wife afraid of a stick shift?" Then there was a bakery ad, which had a picture of a cruller, which looked, once Paul had put his label on it, exactly like female genital organs. And the third was a picture of Ronald Reagan holding a young boy's head in his hands, and the boy was about, I guess, the height of Monica Lewinsky if she were on her knees. Anyway, what we've learned from the recent events in Washington in the Monica Lewinsky case is, in fact, there are still two parties in America. They are the pro-sex party and the anti-sex party. Now, this is in fact true. We are in the era of the soft machine. And in the era of the soft machine, consumerism rules and pollsters rule, and Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton agree on the economy, on war, on the budget, on debt. So all that's left, the only issues that Americans disagree on are sex issues, and they are abortion, gay rights, women's rights, welfare, and affirmative action, civil rights in this country being a sexual issue, and I'm not going to touch that one, but it is. Now, the good news is that the pro-sex party seems to have won. And on that note, I think we're gonna I'm gonna get out of this and turn this over to questions with the moderator.
We already have a question.
Yeah. First, I want to say that the way to tell softcore pornography was that it would give a man a soft on.
Okay.
And a soft on can be defined as something that you know it when you see it.
Right.
In this case, you know it when you don't.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And then I also wanted to, I'm sorry, I just wanted to point out to Ariana that as to the idea of hanging up on pollsters, they've already taken a poll on that and found out it wouldn't work. And then one other point, which is I was very much influenced by Lenny Bruce, who said that he was part of everything that he indicted. So I think it's important for satirists not to separate themselves and make themselves superior to the people they criticize. And
yeah, we are the enemy.
And
our enemy.
Well, at least we're not peerless. But you know, I was at Ariana's talk this afternoon, where I mean, I'm sure I read somewhere in her column about the evils of some kind of illegal wiretapping, and yet she said that she had snooped on her 8-year-old daughter's diary, and I wonder how you would justify that in an age where you value privacy so much.
Oh, actually, not only would I justify it, but I would highly recommend it. I think you should all snoop in your children's bedrooms after they fall asleep. My children are 8 and 6, and by snooping in my oldest daughter's diary, I found what she had written about the presidential sex scandal. She was trying to make sense of it, and she had numbered her responses. 1, the president is floundering. She created that word between philandering and floundering. 2, the president and Monica had sex, parents, we think, which was the journalistic equivalent of allegedly. And it went on like that, 3, 4. And when I finished reading it, part of me wanted to sit down and cry at the fact that we had intruded in our children's minds at an early age all those concepts. And the other part of me, of course, laughed. But what can you do when you really have to turn off CNN when your kids walk into the room? And
well,
when increasingly Cocky Roberts is sounding like Dr. Ruth.
So
we have to teach them at a young age how to remove a semen stain so they don't learn it on the street.
We also had to ask the president only the other day, was that a V-chip in his pocket, or was he just pleased to see us? Now look, it's obvious already that we have a great deal more to fear than fear itself in this room, and it's your turn, ladies and gentlemen, to join the Feast of Reason and the Flow of Soul. There are microphones. They won't make you any louder, but they do help C-SPAN very much. So if you can find a microphone to ask your question, that would be grand. And anyone who's boring or tedious will be cut off without compunction.
You'll know it when you hear it.
On your comment on the pollsters, I think there's something even more insidious. These damned focus groups whose purpose is to get people to vote with their gonads rather than their intellects, and they're succeeding.
Yes, in fact, did you know that the cover photograph of Newt Gingrich in his new book was focus group tested to make sure he wore the right things and make sure that his approval rating stayed right above those of the Unabomber. So I completely agree with you, and I treat focus groups and polling with the same kind of contempt. And when you hear politicians increasingly say, we did a poll on that, and that's why we're going with that issue, you realize that pollsters are running American politics. And what Paul said about how many people are already hanging up on pollsters, you know, it's true that the dirty little secret of polling is that of those called, 40% are not there. You get voicemail or answering machines. Of those reached, 35 to 40% refuse to talk to pollsters. So already, basically, the only people being polled are lonely, bored Americans who want to find somebody to talk to. And that's the representative sample.
I'm sorry. You know, I think that's a shallow, cheap, knee-jerk reaction. and I'm sincere about this.
Don't
Not
hold back,
yours,
Larry.
the question. No, I mean, focus groups and polling and all this stuff was developed by consumer market researchers, right? And they have brought us better cars, more appealing cigarettes, more stylish clothes, and a higher level of, consumer existence. And all they really do is what democracy is supposed to do, is bring the consumers the politics they want. And that's a good thing.
In
It's a
fact,
lousy thing.
I understand in the year 2000, the election, the booths will not have the names of the candidates, just the names of the poll that you trust the most. Gallup, the CNN, and you just check the one that you trust the most.
It is voting in the passive voice now, and it leads to virtual politics and virtual elections. And it's interesting, you never get rung up and asked, do you think that Alan Greenspan's control of the Federal Reserve's money supply is too tight? They don't trust you with the answer to a question like that. It's all, do you think, well, actually the Los Angeles Times once, I think, set a hard-to-emulate standard question by asking people if they thought Ronald Reagan's colon cancer would or would not recur. Might recur, would recur quite soon, no, was banished, and so on. Answers solemnly given and taken and printed on the front page of the paper. Who's got the mic? Don't look at me if you want to ask a question, otherwise follow the microphone.
Okay, I was... Hello? Can you hear?
Yes.
I was wondering, in reflecting on your remarks about satire and the fall of satire and that sort of thing, I was wondering, thinking about the Soviet Union and people's lamentation that with the fall of communism and the fall of some of that suffering, the result is intellectuals aren't doing so well, and whether maybe the fall of satire in this country is partly a reflection of that the economy is doing well, and is that such a bad trade-off?
I hate that question. But as a matter of fact, no, Lenny Bruce was a great success at a time when everyone was talking about nothing but consumerism and boom and America the preeminent. So no, I don't think there's necessarily any correlation between a narcotized society and, or I mean, say narcotized in the wrong way.
Actually, Lenny Bruce was a great success commercially, but I mean, it was a great success in terms of his influence. But at the time, both financially and publicly, he was like, I don't know, a minor character that was known to not that many people. He's somebody whose legend has grown over the years. So Lenny Bruce in his own time was more famous for his trials than his stand-up.
But here is something that we're not challenging. We're not challenging the assumption that things are going well. In fact, one of the great bipartisan frauds of modern times is that assumption. You turn on the Sunday morning shows and Republicans and Democrats all start with the premise that this is a great time. And then you look a little deeper and you see that effectively America has become two nations. And the good economic times are influencing and affecting the one nation. And the entire political conversation is about the one nation. And the second nation, the other nation of the inner cities and the crumbling public schools and the super predators and the gangs and the violence, is basically completely out of the public debate like never before.
My God, she's become a communist.
And it's because they use the stock market as the barometer when stocks go up because people are being downsized. So that means more profits. So, it's just our national purpose is greed. And so as the stockholders are as guilty as Alan Greenspan.
Maybe there? There's a lady there with her hand up. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on, Ariana Huffington mentioned that the media are like sheep and not questioning Clinton a little bit closer, his comments in Africa. And I actually saw part of the White House Correspondents' Dinner on C-SPAN, was it last night? I don't know why, I was just enthralled by it for whatever reason. And I was really struck by the fact that, here you have this meshing of political figures, media, and celebrities all in this one place. And it really doesn't seem very strange to me that they're not pressing Clinton on these things when they're schmoozing together. I mean, they're like buddies. How are you expecting the media to be the subjective source when really they're friends with each other, and you really don't want to push your buddies to do, to say something that makes them uncomfortable? So How do you explain that?
Well, you're right about that, but even so, say last year, the year before, with Al Franken and others being the entertainment at these dinners, you had more biting political satire. This is the first year, in my experience, when you had none, absolutely zero. And that's, I think, very significant, because the media somehow, in a sense, consider the state of the president at the moment still fragile. We don't know what's going to happen. There is still an uncertainty there. And nobody wants to rock the boat. There is such an incumbency protection racket in Washington between the media, the Congress, and the presidency. And nobody wants to do anything which would be remotely biting. And yet the essence of satire is that it has to touch a raw nerve. That's why I really want to do the show that I'm calling Eat the Press. To expose the way news and entertainment have basically merged. I mean, Harry Shearer just downloaded from his satellite Tom Brokaw, who had to go away for the weekend, recording the announcement of Frank Sinatra's death, just in case it happened. And it is really a scary thing to watch, to have Tom Brokaw with this mock emotion, this kind of voice. A major voice of the century has passed, and moving on like that, and the man is still alive as far as I know.
Not because a lot of us haven't tried writing his obituary, though. Actually, there was also a download, wasn't there, recently, of Dan Rather covering the first bombs on Baghdad, which must have been perfect from your point of
Oh, I
view.
loved that. I wanted that to run. No offense to the Iraqi people, I'm sorry. There was a download by...
No, we don't do repeats.
Oh,
you have to listen the first time. Who has another question?
Yeah, hasn't this concept of political correctness really hurt satire? You can't say anything about anybody anymore. They'll sue you.
Oh, yes, we can. Would you like to say something about somebody that would be...
well, if you're going to do it in fiction, which is my thing, I write fiction, you take, for example, a politically incorrect joke about women, as I did, a joke that I happen to love, but I knew that I could, as the narrator, couldn't say it, so I had George Bush say it.
Ariana?
Well, the other way you can do it is really by translating what politicians are saying into English. In the Lincoln bedroom, I created a character which is a talking television with a BS chip, which is really much more needed than the V chip. And that television translates everything that politicians are saying. It's called closed captioning for the ethically impaired. And you can read the entire State of the Union address translated through my television.
I think it's a matter of just giving form to what already exists. So, for example, when Colin Powell, who was the first African American to become the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he came out against gays in the military. So I would hold an imaginary dialogue with Colin Powell and say, General, why don't you say that you don't want gays in the military because it would make the other men in the barracks feel uncomfortable, but isn't that what they once said about blacks in the military? And then Colin Powell answered, yes, but we never told anybody we were black. That was the beginning of the don't ask, don't tell policy.
And I was about to say, and it wasn't kosher to ask either. Who else?
Right here.
Ma'am.
I was wondering if any of you are familiar with a Canadian program called Newsroom on KCET that I think is doing a better job of spoofing the media than any American show I've seen. It's Friday nights from 10 to 11.
There's a question flirting with disqualification for the panel. But we'll allow it, we'll take it. Your views on recent Canadian satirical broadcasting?
No.
North of the border satire? Well,
I think it was on the same time as South Park, so...
But the larger point of the question is that the English and maybe the Canadians are much better at this stuff than the Americans.
That's not true.
There is a tremendous...
That's
Why
ridiculous.
is this man attacking me all the time?
I mean, I just lived in England for 3 years.
I
What a
lived there for
humorless
12.
people.
That's not... This is...
I mean, this is a country where I don't think anybody's had sex sober.
This is the...
Not America, England.
This is the only man who has so far entirely equated satire with sex. I'd like to know more about his sex life, but in the meantime, I lived in England for 12 years. During the time of That Was the Week That Was,
And
Monty
never touched a
Python-
drop, I was told.
What?
And you never touched a drop, I was told.
Well, let's put it that way. I never inhaled. But, and that's where I met Chris, but we won't talk about that. The point is that there is something about political satire in England that's a lot tougher, political invective. I mean, when you have Congressman Burton calling the president a scumbag.
I am not a scumbag.
compare that to the political invective of Disraeli against Gladstone, when he said that if Gladstone falls in the Thames, that will be a calamity. If they pull him out, that will be a catastrophe.
I was there for the inhaling, by the way. I keep meaning to share this with you too. The then student, not even Governor Clinton, of course, has always been allergic to smoke, and so naturally has never inhaled anything at all. But marijuana then used to be baked into brownies and cookies and mainlined with both hands in mass quantities.
But he didn't
It was the
swallow.
most cleverly lawyered reply that he could ever possibly have given it. It's funny that the one that he spent most time polishing, a lying reply, was the one that got him into most trouble, because there are still people, and let's celebrate the fact, who can spot a phony at 10 feet.
Well, you know, we're all assuming that he's lying these days. And I try to have an open mind. You know, it's not like the case of Kathleen Willey or Paula Jones, where one says yes and the other denies it. So one of them is lying. But in the case of Monica Lewinsky, both Clinton and Monica deny it. Now, what is the possibility that they're both telling the truth?
Zero.
Well, no, but... No, but you have to remain open-minded. Now, you remember...
No, you don't. That's an absurd statement. That's exactly what they said to all the intellectuals who visited the Soviet Union, and they were shown the Potemkin villages. And when they were hearing about the torture going on in the Gulag archipelago, they were told, you got to keep an open mind. You haven't seen it with your own eyes. Keeping an open mind has been the greatest disaster in the 20th century in the way you're describing it.
Well, but just suppose, just take the because after all, Dick Morris was in on the White House. It was he who suggested that Clinton get a dog named Buddy. I think it was, the original name was Photo Op. It was Dick Morris who suggested that Hillary and Bill dance on the beach without music. And it was Dick Morris who suggested that, he said it hypothetically, if the rumor were true that Hillary Clinton is a lesbian, then it would make it understandable that Bill has to seek his outlets elsewhere. Now, suppose that were true. Suppose that Monica came to the White House 37 times, not for Bill, but for Hillary. So they're both telling the truth and denying it. And he's being a devoted husband by also taking the fall for her.
Well done, Paul.
Thank you very much.
It was also Dick Morris who was author of the stunning bestseller, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From the Yellow Pages.
Oh, that's right next to Monica's biography, Going Down in History.
And the difference between the leader of the free world and the Titanic is only 300 women went down on the Titanic. Okay, have we got another one?
Yeah, but it took a lot longer.
You know, I've heard literally
Well, on that occasion, there was a band playing.
hundreds and hundreds of jokes about that. Because, I mean, what happens now is because of the internet and because of faxes and because of shock jocks on radio, the time that even while a tragedy is occurring, such as the fire at Waco, there are already jokes about that the Branch Davidians, you could get them in regular or crispy, while it was going on. So that what happens is there's a kind of dehumanization whereas people look at the news only as setups for their material rather than examining the horror behind it. And so it's just part of the MTV attention span.
Do you think there's a conflict between your criticism that satire is withering and the statement that you just made?
What would the conflict be?
You're saying that satire is withering, that people aren't being satiric even at the dinner last night, and now you're complaining, Mr. Krasner, that events in the news are only a setup for comedians, as though that's a bad thing too. One of you has to be wrong.
There's no contradiction. Next.
No, actually, let me.
A contradiction is not two things said by two different people.
No, but there is
Not
an
on this
important
show.
point, and it's very easy to reconcile the contradiction because there is a difference between ridicule and satire. There is a difference between late-night Jay Leno jokes and real satire of the kind that Jonathan Swift and Mark Twain and Aristophanes wrote, which is rooted in conviction. I mean, that's the difference.
But the point is, I've been told by professors of literature who have used Jonathan Swift's modest proposal in their classes, and the students have been so jaded from what they've seen that they thought that was a true story and wanted to know only the details about eating the Irish babies. Tell us more.
That wasn't a
Well,
true
that was
story?
true of a lot of the original English audience, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
As with Defoe. Ma'am, you've been very patient.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear this. Okay, satire, it depends, you have to have content. You have a little bit of time to get to content to get to satire, as opposed to mild-mannered humor. And by the way, satire, people used to be afraid of satire. I just heard Larry Gelbart say that when he was opening, City of Dreams, and was all ready to go open on Broadway, the Schubert said, they looked at his press packet and said, "You're not calling that a comedy?" So, okay, comedy now is dangerous, and that isn't even really telling anybody anything. But it occurs to me that if the media is on its knees, not just Monica Lewinsky, but the media as it's collapsed on its knees in the last 20 years, at the same time we have nobody's reading anymore. Maybe that's the way we're going to get to a free press again, because if the amount of people who read shrink to a tiny elite, we could probably get a free press again because it won't upset anybody.
Was that a question?
No. I waited so long.
And was it a question at a book fair?
Who else we got?
Can bad satire be successfully satirized, and has it ever?
Hemingway.
Hemingway where?
It's no contradiction.
No contradiction.
It worked before.
It worked before. Keep trying. We'll keep trying till we get a live one. Best behavior, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing obvious.
I'm wondering, is this on? I'm wondering what direct impacts you've seen your satire have on policy or opinion making, and if you can give a few examples.
Yeah.
It's a very worthy question.
It's an excellent question. I am told,
very serious, good
probably
question.
not reliably, that at when they were ready to go and start Gulf War II, somebody said, "Well, we can't do that. They'll think it's Wag the Dog." And my mother was really impressed by that.
But also, at the intersection of satire and dissent, you have the Columbus, Ohio town hall meeting, where you had Madeleine Albright and the Secretary of Defense arriving there with their talking points, thinking they were just going to feed that same pablum to the people, and just a dozen hecklers made mincemeat of them, ridiculed them, humiliated them, and changed American foreign policy. So it just shows how few people it really takes, just a critical mass of people, to turn things around.
Yeah, and I waited for those hacks like Berger and others to say, which they did in the end through absolutely gritted teeth, well, it shows what a vibrant democracy we've got. I thought, I wonder how long it'll be till they have another such vibrant exercise.
A very
on
long
anything
time.
That we, I also think we probably haven't done enough honor to the Custard Pie International. I see someone knows what I mean. Those who go around doing the practical satire of imploding pies into the faces of men like Gates. Anyone want to say a word in their defense? Practical
Do they need
satire.
defense?
Practical. No, okay, we'll pass on.
No.
We're running low on time. We're approaching the last 5 minutes, so pungent, thrusting questions, please.
I must say, indeed, that Fitzgerald was wrong, because there are indeed second acts in American life. And Ariana is a great example of one, because I seem to recall...
Wait, I already said that.
I seem to recall a few years ago that she and her husband spent about $26 million...
28.
I stand corrected, and in fact, indeed, on consultants and Ed Rollins, my God, and political commercials, pollsters, and so forth. And
Well, I learned from it, didn't I?
Good for you.
and indeed,
Ariana has never believed in education on the cheap for herself or anyone else, I'm here to say.
Do you have anything interesting to say about the phenomenon of Rush Limbaugh?
You mean something more than Al Franken said? Rush Limbaugh is a fat, big idiot or whatever?
Aren't they requiring airbags in the driver's seat as well, and the passenger seat now?
I remember that cartoon in the New Yorker of the guy sitting in the bar and saying, I never watched Cheers, so I shan't be missing Cheers. I never could see the point of Limbaugh. It never was anything in my life. Never saw it, never got it. The great motto is always, this too will pass.
You know, you said the world was becoming more dehumanized. I agree with you. I think the world was more humanized 80 years ago or so, when there was more quote-unquote repression. And I think I would like to ask that question, if you've thought about that. Now that we have everything out in the open, everything is relative, and quote-unquote there is no repression, we have a more dehumanized world. I think the world was much more humanized back when Thackeray and Tennyson, Dickens, and all the great authors were writing at that time about real problems in the human culture.
We're talking about 1918, World War I, the influenza epidemic.
Well, for me, you know, in my logic class at Cambridge, they called this the fallacy of the undistributed middle, because you know at the same time you had repression and great painters. Repression caused the great painters. I mean, there's a kind of false correlation here, and I don't think that by bringing back repression we are going to bring the changes about that you seem to want to see.
No, I'm saying everything is out in the open. Homosexuality, all the sex. He said that we had two parties. One is pro-sex and one's anti-sex. I'd say we have two parties that are both pro-sex. One is pro-moral sex, and one is pro-immoral sex.
Pro-immoral sex is pro-sex, pro-moral sex is celibacy.
No, I think he means... No, I can clarify this as well. This is what moderators are for. He means oral and immoral is what
sorry.
Okay, who's next? Because we've got 3 minutes for anyone who wants to be discovered as a good questioner on C-SPAN.
Yes, I have a question for the panel. There's been a debate in my community recently between a group who is promoting the concept that political correctness is a right-wing conspiracy. What are your thoughts?
Everything is a right-wing conspiracy, but some things are a vast right-wing conspiracy.
You know, I have been a conspiracy researcher for many years, and when the First Lady of the nation went on national TV and said there's a vast right-wing conspiracy, I knew I could retire. I could pass the torch on to Hillary.
So that was your Tom Lehrer moment, in other words?
It was, yes. Another time the left and right lobes of my brains fused. It's happening more and more often.
Sir, quick.
It seems to me there's been a very long history of incredibly brutal cartoons and newspapers in this country, and that prose satire has always been much more tame. Like in the early times, we had tremendously brutal cartoons drawn out, but what you read is not as brutal. Do you agree with what I'm saying? And if so, why do you think we don't see more very brutal satire?
I think one of the few saving things in the press is the autonomy given to cartoonists, the relative autonomy, including at the LA Times. But a lot of papers, that's the only thing that saves it from consensus journalism. But you still do get, say in my hometown paper in Washington, Mr. Herblock, his idea of a punchy cartoon is to have a donkey, that's how you'll know it's a Democrat, with boxing gloves confronting an elephant, that's how you know it's a Republican. And then that's how you could guess, say, there might be an election on or something like that, because everything was all taken care of. So it wants watching in the cartoon area as well. And unfortunately, when cartoonists go bad, they're much harder to sack than the ordinary hack is.
But also, it's the deadening of what passes for humor on TV whenever they have a laugh track. I mean, a laugh track is the lowest form of fascism, in the sense that what could be more individualized than your sense of humor, and yet the laugh track is dead people laughing at I Love Lucy, who are now laughing at Seinfeld. I mean, that's the only kind of immortality I believe in, the laugh track. But at least, somebody mentioned Larry Gelbart before, at least MASH, they had a laugh track, but in the hospital operating rooms, the laugh track, they never used it in the operating room. So, you know, taste is a relative matter.
Right, well, the word from the control box is it isn't going to get any better than this, so we'll fold now. We're just exactly on time. Thank you all very much for coming. Those of you, wait, hold it. Those of you who want an inscribed copy of any of our books, your butts should be at the Campbell steps immediately subsequently.
And get your free copy of The Realist as you leave.
Sign it. Free copy of the paper.
You got to sign it for me.